what happened before, what happened afterwards, to get the exact meaning of what's going on with these questions. All right. Freedom Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church is located in Kingsport, Tennessee. We're at 401 West Sullivan Street in Kingsport, and we'd love to have you come worship with us. Since tonight is a very special passage, I want to get right into it. All right. John chapter 8. John chapter 8 is one of the most misused, misabused, most hijacked passages in Scripture that is often used. And the question tonight is a question that the Pharisees, the chief priests, the scribes, the religious leaders of Israel asked Jesus about the woman caught in adultery. The woman caught in adultery. And they asked Jesus, again they asked, now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned, but what sayest thou? Meaning, Moses said we should stone people caught in adultery. What do you say? And they're trying to ask, why did they ask him that? What was this whole situation about? Now, what most people do is they look at Jesus' answer, because later Jesus answered and said, he that is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone. All right, and they take and interpret that as Jesus is saying, only people who have perfect lives, who have never ever sinned, should ever even talk about somebody whether they're sinning or not. Should ever even talk about sin, only if you have a perfect life. They take the phrase that's not in the Bible, people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, and they equate it with Jesus saying, he that is without sin, let him cast the first stone. That is not what's going on here. Jesus is not saying you have to be absolutely perfect before you can say something else is sin. That's not what he's saying here. In fact, when he says cast stones, he's not talking about just saying something mean to somebody. He's not talking about accusing somebody of sin. He's talking about killing them with real rocks. So let's look and see what's really going on in this passage, why these people asked Jesus this question, and how did he answer that? Why did he answer it the way he did? All right. If we remember earlier, John chapter 6 and John chapter 7, it's very clear. They explicitly say the chief priests, the scribes, even the Pharisees, they want to kill Jesus. They're trying to arrest him several times. They've tried to arrest him. Last time in chapter 7, they asked a group of officers, why didn't you arrest him yet? All right. And they were amazed. Now here in John chapter 8, what's going on is Jesus has come back to Jerusalem. He initially cleared the temple. He went away to Galilee and he came back. And he's back in Jerusalem teaching. He knows they want to arrest him. He knows they want to kill him. He's spending the night on the Mount of Olives, and in the morning he's coming back into the temple preaching, where he's surrounded by a lot of people, and the people love to hear him teach. So that's what's going on. John chapter 8, the first 4 verses give us some context. Jesus went up in the Mount of Olives, and early in the morning he came again into the temple. And all the people came unto him, and he sat down and taught them. And the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they say unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what sayest thou? Verse 6 says, This they said, tempting him, that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground as though he heard them not. So what's going on here? Jesus is back in the temple. He's teaching. The chief priests, the scribes, Pharisees, all the religious leaders in Jerusalem don't like it. They're trying to find some way to bring Jesus down, and they eventually want him arrested, want him killed. So they ask him this question. They just happened to bring this woman caught in adultery to him. They interrupt his teaching, put this woman in front of him and say, hey, we just happened coincidentally to catch this woman in adultery. The law of Moses says she needs to be stoned to death. What do you say? And they'd ask that question, it says in verse 6, tempting him, testing him, that they might accuse him. That they might accuse him of what? All right? This is a setup. Jesus is being set up, because it says that to tempt him, to test him, to accuse him. To accuse him of what? Well, if he answers the question and says, no, you shouldn't stone her to death, then he is contradicting the law of Moses, the law that God gave to Moses. And they can say, you're teaching against Moses, you need to go away. You're teaching against the law, people don't need to listen to you anymore. In fact, you ought to be arrested. They could say that. All right? And later on, they did try to accuse him of that. If he said, yes, you should stone her to death, then under Roman law, the Jews could not execute anybody. Excuse me. They're conquered people. They're living under the Roman Empire and the Roman law. And you have to have the Romans' permission to kill somebody. So if he says, yes, you should stone her to death, then they could say, aha, you're taking the law in your own hands. You're disregarding the Romans. You're causing rebellion against the Romans. And they could have had him arrested and killed. Remember, they wanted to kill him. They wanted him crucified, but they had to take him to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, to have Jesus crucified. They weren't allowed to kill him themselves under Roman law. So either way, if Jesus says yes, he's in trouble. If Jesus says no, he's in trouble. But he's Jesus. He's God incarnate. He knows what's going on here. He knows this is a setup. All right. Now, how else does he know it's a setup? What did they say about this woman in verse 4? Master, this woman was taken in adultery, in the very act. Wow. How do you catch someone in the act of adultery? They're walking down the street, headed to the temple. They just trip over this lady in the street, having adultery with somebody? No, probably not. And oh, by the way, how many people does it take to commit adultery? 2. How many people did they bring to Jesus? 1. How did they just happen to catch this one woman in the act of adultery and bring her to Jesus for this testing, tempting question that they set her up too. All right? And Jesus knows this. He's God. They had to bring 2 people. If they want justice, they have to bring 2 people. In Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10, Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10 says the penalty for adultery is to bring both the man and the woman to be killed. Leviticus 20, verse 10. And the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery and with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. All right, the man and the woman both are supposed to die. Yet they only bring Jesus the woman. Now, Deuteronomy chapter 17 talks about how they were supposed to do the death penalty in Israel. Deuteronomy 17, verses 6 and 7. Deuteronomy 17, verses 6 and 7, very important. At the mouth of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall he that is worthy of death be put to death. But at the mouth of 1 witness he shall not be put to death. The hands of the witnesses shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterward the hands of all the people. So thou shalt put the evil away from among you. So in a death penalty case, you had to have at least 2 witnesses or 3, not just 1. But both of the witnesses who say, we saw this, they need to be the first ones to lay hands on the person who killed them. Now we come to Jesus' answer. All right? Remember, they asked Jesus in verse 4, Master, this woman was taken in the act of adultery, in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned, but what sayest thou? This they said, tempting him that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground as though he heard them not. So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said, He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. So they kept asking him, even though he was bent over on the ground drawing, they kept asking him. They wanted a question. They think they have him. It's a gotcha question. If he says yes, he's wrong. If he says no, he's wrong, according to their laws. Then Jesus says, all right, he that is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone at her. All right. How did they catch her? Probably put somebody up to having sex with her. And then, oh, by the way, boom, their friend come in and boom, here you are. Let's take her away. But they're not bringing the man because he was in on the setup. So he and the people that set her up are just as guilty of committing the sin of adultery as is the woman. So the witnesses would have to be killed too. They are just as guilty of the same sin as the woman is in this very instance. This is why Jesus is answering the question the way he is. This was a case of entrapment, so that the woman was set up so they could set up Jesus with this question. All right, the male adulterer, had to be killed too, but they didn't bring him, so they obviously weren't after justice. Verse 6 tells us they were just trying to tempt Jesus, trying to accuse him, get him caught in a gotcha question. All right, therefore, that's why when Jesus says, he that is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone, verse 8, and he again stooped down and wrote on the ground. They which heard it, being convicted of their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest even unto the last, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing in the midst. The witnesses who should have thrown the first rocks to kill her had to go away because they were involved in the same sin. They were involved in the exact same sin. That's what was going on here. Jesus didn't say that you have to be absolutely perfect before you say something is sin. No. He's saying these people, y'all are involved in the whole same mess. Jesus answered, satisfied the requirements of the law, and exposed the setup, the conspiracy, all at the same time. So he gave a perfect answer that was absolutely right according to the law, and then he went on to show the woman mercy. He had talked the crowd out of killing her and said, I'm not going to condemn you, meaning I'm not going to condemn you to death. He didn't mean I'm not going to say that you're a sinner. He means I'm not going to kill you. That's what condemn means, to kill them in this context. And then he tells her, go and sin no more. He's saying, yeah, what you did is sin. Don't do it anymore. I'm concerned not only about your life, but about your soul. All right? If you like studying Scripture, line by line, verse by verse, what comes before it, what comes after it, to get the real answer of what's going on here, then hit like, hit share, tell other people about it. All right? Next week, the question is John 8, verse 57. Then said the Jews unto him, thou art not yet 50 years old, and thou hast seen Abraham? You're not even 50 years old yet, and you're saying you have seen Abraham? Why are they asking him that, and how did Jesus answer that?